In 1900, New York City tenements killed more people per square block than any battlefield in America, and nobody was allowed to talk about it. Most people think tenement reform happened because wealthy philanthropists felt guilty. That's the story we learned in school. Charitable rich people looked down from their mansions, saw suffering, and pushed for better housing laws out of pure compassion. It sounds noble, it feels complete, and it's almost entirely backward. Let's start with what actually existed. Between 1880 and 1910, New York City packed nearly 2 million people into a few square miles of lower Manhattan. Families of 8 lived in apartments smaller than a modern garage. No running water in most units, no indoor toilets, garbage rotted in alleys. Rats weren't a pest problem, they were infrastructure. Disease spread like water-finding cracks. Tuberculosis, cholera, typhoid fever, they didn't stay in the tenements, they leaked uptown. A maid working in a Fifth Avenue mansion carried tuberculosis home. A laundress handling clothes from infected families brought typhoid to her employer's neighborhood. Suddenly, the disease wasn't about poor people anymore, it was about everyone. That's when the actual pressure started, not moral pressure, economic pressure. Rich neighborhoods were getting sick, businesses were losing workers, insurance companies were paying out claims at rates they couldn't sustain. The math didn't work anymore. Tenements weren't a poverty problem, they were a contagion problem that threatened profit. So reformers didn't lead, they followed. People like Lawrence Vailor and Theodore Roosevelt weren't crusaders charging ahead of public opinion, they were translating a crisis into law. They had leverage because the threat was real and visible to everyone with money. When you're afraid for yourself, suddenly housing codes seem reasonable. The first major law came in 1867. Then came the real one, the Tenement House Act of 1901. It required windows in every room, indoor plumbing, fire escapes, limits on how many people could occupy a space. On paper, it sounds basic. In reality, it was radical. It said, the city has a right to tell you how to build and how to live. Landlords fought it hard. These laws meant spending money. Installing plumbing cost real dollars. Adding windows meant structural changes. Some landlords simply abandoned buildings rather than comply. But here's what changed everything: enforcement. New York created a housing inspection department. Inspectors had teeth. Violations meant fines. Fines meant financial pain. The law didn't eliminate tenements, it transformed them. You couldn't build the same way anymore. New buildings had to meet standards. Old buildings had to upgrade or die. Rents went up because compliance cost money. That pushed some poor families further out to newer neighborhoods or to other cities. The tenement problem didn't vanish, it migrated. But something else happened too. Death rates fell, tuberculosis cases dropped, cholera disappeared from New York entirely, infant mortality declined. You can see it in the data. Before 1901, the numbers were catastrophic. After, they improved, not overnight, but steady. The connection between housing standards and public health became undeniable. This mattered beyond New York. Other cities watched. They saw that regulation didn't collapse the housing market, it changed it. Boston passed similar laws. Chicago did too. By the 1920s, most major American cities had tenement codes. They weren't identical, but the principle was the same. The government could mandate minimum standards. The real story then is this: housing reform wasn't about charity. It was about contagion. Fear of disease, fear of economic loss, fear of disorder, those are what moved the needle. When self-interest aligned with public health, suddenly change happened fast. Compassion helped sell it, but fear built it. And here's the implication most people miss: those laws are still with us. Every building code you see today, every requirement for insulation, ventilation, electrical safety, traces back to this moment. We inherited a system built on the idea that housing isn't just a commodity, it's infrastructure that affects everyone. That doesn't mean housing problems are solved. They're not. But the framework exists because once in New York, people realized that someone else's bad housing was their own problem. The tenement laws didn't come from morality. They came from understanding how cities actually work. Everything's connected. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research. If you want to understand the hidden forces that shaped where you live and why housing costs what it does, subscribe. There's a new story about urban economics every week. Subscribe, there's a new story about urban economics and the forces shaping our cities every week. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research.